Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keith. I'm very excited to be joined by two gentlemen who know probably a lot more about the UFC than I do. James and Mark. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you guys doing?
Excellent, thank you.
Excellent, thanks for having us, buddy.
Yeah, I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to talk about a couple of things that are happening within the UFC. First of all, let's start with the news that's still shaking everybody to their knees. Ronda Rousey getting KO'd by Holly Holm. Your reactions?
Unbelievable performance by Holly Holm. I think the thought that that I'm left with after seeing that fight is, why didn't we see this coming?
Yeah.
It amazes me how nobody was predicting Holly Holm to dominate Ronda Rousey in the fashion that she did. In retrospect, the style that Holly Holm brought to that fight was exactly the right style to beat Ronda Rousey, and nobody predicted it outside of Holly Holm's inner circle.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that surprised me was the fan reaction after, and just, it's the only time I've ever come to work and my whole squad had their YouTube up looking at the knockout, and I think it speaks to how big Ronda really is and how much she actually reaches these different places that really no one has taken MMA into so many different, whether it's media, looking at, women's rights and women's equality. I think she's really moved the mark, but it was very, very surprising what happened. And I think, to Mark's point, we both messaged after, we felt a little bit silly that we bought into the hype like everyone else did. And I don't think there was any way to see that coming.
Yeah, I think it's Ronda's captivated pop culture in a unique way that no other fighter's been able to do. And I think, to James's point, I heard more people talking about this fight than I have really any fight that I can remember.
100%. She was absolutely dominant in the UFC. And I don't want to talk about her like her career is over. I think we're all excited to see what she does next. But I also think people like the losses to Miesha Tate, Liz Carmouche, Betch Kohea, all those losses, Holly Holm was able to study those and lay out a blueprint of how to defeat Ronda Rousey, because in a lot of her fights she was getting hit, they just weren't doing significant damage, and she was able to apply what I call the Anderson Silva method of you let that other person's momentum take them and then be quick to strike, and that was able to help.
She was really the first fighter that actually used footwork in a fight, to be honest, and actually had an answer for someone coming forward the way that Ronda does.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest stories coming out of the fight was Ronda's trainer, Edmund Taverdian. When you look at his advice in the corner, advice to keep doing what you're doing, keep rushing in, considering she was getting tagged, multiple times in that first round, I think was ultimately surprising. And the fact that she was, swinging or essentially moving herself to the right into Holly's, straight left hand, which kind of turned her around right before the kick. It didn't look like she was prepared for a left-hander, which is ultimately surprising at the top of the game.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because so many people have said that Ronda's corner completely let her down. It's like everybody knew, or everybody seemed to have an idea of how Holly Holm would approach this fight, except for people in Ronda Rousey's camp. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
In the defense of Ronda's camp, I will say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's hard to argue with people who have had a had a track record of not losing ever.
Absolutely.
So understand that they thought their recipe was the right one. Hopefully now they can understand that it's definitely not the right recipe to beat Holly Holm.
And they're going to see what happens next, absolutely. A couple of things I want to talk about. We are about 1 week away from what we're calling the fight of the year. We've got Conor McGregor, the interim featherweight champion, going against Jose Aldo, the featherweight champion in Vegas. A big card. Also, not to forget, we've also got Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman for the middleweight title. So let's go right to the main event. How do you guys see that fight playing out?
I think one of the most interesting things about this fight for me is that Conor McGregor is actually the odds-on favorite now in this fight. Conor McGregor is about minus 125 for most of the odd makers. If you look at the first fight, Jose Aldo was actually favored in that fight. So it's amazing to see, without having fought, Jose Aldo's gone from being the favorite to being the underdog, and Conor, on the strength of a victory against a guy that Jose Aldo beat twice, Chad Mendes, has actually vaulted up into being a favorite in this fight. So are the odds makers buying into the hype? Did they see something that maybe some of us don't see? I still think that Conor's got to prove himself against someone who's a top striker like Jose Aldo.
And who's had a full camp, too.
But I think this is still a very intriguing matchup, and I think it's pretty much a pick'em fight for me.
Okay.
It's funny because it splits our group quite a bit. Nick, Mark, and I, we talk about it often, and we're on different sides of the spectrum a little bit. But I really think the big differences in this fight are going to be Conor McGregor's footwork, his movement, his speed, and his power. You know, when you look at Jose Aldo and they stand next to each other, Conor McGregor towers over him. So if it's a 25-minute fight and he can land on his chin, I think that's a, you know, battle-tested chin, as Conor would say. And I think, you know, if too many of those hit, he's going down.
Yeah. I go back to the Mendes fight with McGregor, and I think to myself, if Mendes had a full camp, who knows what would have happened. He was able to take down McGregor with ease. He was just gassed. He was clearly gassed. I think I look at Conor McGregor as Chael Sonnen 2.0, except he wins. He talks a good game. He's, you know, we've seen instances where he seems like a nice guy, but when he's in front of the camera and he's doing the whole hyping the fight, he's very good at it. I don't want to sell Jose Aldo short because Jose Aldo's been doing this for years. He's never lost in the UFC. He's been a dominant champion. I think the fight's very intriguing. I do think that if we're going to do predictions, I'd be interested in getting yours. My prediction is I think Jose Aldo comes out of this fight because he's been very good at just being able to kind of brush off all of the rhetoric. Yeah. You know, when we go back to that fight where McGregor won against Seaver, he jumps out of the octagon and he charges Aldo. Aldo didn't break a sweat. He didn't. His heartbeat didn't change. Like he was just poised.
Yeah.
And I think that for all of the talking McGregor's done, if we go back and we look at who McGregor's beaten, and with all due respect to those opponents, I'm sure they kick my butt. That's not the point. But the only legitimate contender that he really beat was Chad Mendes, who didn't have a full camp. Right. So he still, in my opinion, he still has to prove himself. And he's gonna be in rough against Jose Aldo. I don't think it's gonna be some walk in the park. So we'll see what happens there. Predictions on that fight. How do you guys see that going down?
I'm going to go ahead and predict that Jose Aldo retains his championship with a 5-round decision.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to call Conor McGregor TKO early second round.
Early second round, okay. The middleweight championship is the co-main event. We've got Luke Rockhold. So a lot of ladies apparently will be tuning in for this pay-per-view, going up against the All-American Chris Weidman. How do you guys see that fight panning out?
I think that Rockhold may in fact have the style to beat Weidman.
Okay.
He is no slouch on the ground at all, as we saw against Lyoto Machida, and we've seen in previous bouts. He was able to survive with Jacare in Strikeforce several years back as well. I think that the striking from Rockhold is going to be something that Weidman hasn't seen before. He hasn't dealt with someone with that level of striking. He hasn't dealt with a southpaw with that level of striking. And I'm going to differentiate Weidman from Lyoto Machida. Lyoto is a southpaw, and Weidman actually did quite well against him. But they're two different animals on the feet. So I think Rockhold may have the upper hand in this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like styles make fights, and I think if Luke Rockhold can keep it on the feet and use his movement, use those heavy strikes that we've seen the last little while. I do believe, though, if Chris Weidman closes the distance and takes him down, similar to you saw with Vitor Belfort, he has the ability to hold people down and land some big shots. So it really depends on who's going to be able to take the fight to where they want it to go. Personally, I don't think I can bet against Chris Weidman at this point. He's just he's filled all my doubts, and I've fully joined his team. So I'm going to pick Chris Weidman third round.
You see, the interesting thing too is that I was a Weidman doubter because let's be honest, his wins against Anderson Silva were asterisk wins. You had the he was cocky, Anderson got caught, and then the leg break, and then he went through. He's gone through people who might not necessarily be at the peak of their career, like Vitor Belfort and Machida, but he does keep winning. So it'll be interesting to see what this fight brings. The big thing for me with this, and we kind of talked about this a little bit off camera, is I'm a little concerned about the relevance of the middleweight title, in the sense that when Anderson Silva was the champion, I cannot remember a time where the middleweight championship would ever have been a co-main event. And maybe it's because Anderson Silva was that big of a draw. So now we're looking at Chris Weidman's coming into his it's not his first or second, like probably his fourth or so title defense, if not more. And now he's the co-main event. Is it because the UFC is trying to stack cards and give us the best card possible, or is it because Weidman can't draw that big crowd?
I think it's the former. I think that they've stacked this card, and nobody's going to headline over Jose Aldo against Conor McGregor right now. That's going to be the highest grossing fight probably in recent history. So I don't think anyone's going to headline over that. I think where you might see Weidman headlining coming up is the potential card in April at Madison Square Garden, provided the New York legislature can actually get MMA legalized in New York. They do have a tentative date set for MSG in April, so we may see Weidman headline that unless John Jones Cormier comes along may headline that card, that might actually materialize as well. But I do think Weidman is capable of headlining a card. He's certainly stronger than a Demetrius Johnson or some of the other folks who are definitely non-draws. But I do think that there's merit to the point that there's not as much money in the pay-per-views headlined by Weidman as there might have been in the Anderson Silva era for middleweights. And if you're going to look at the welterweight division, probably that same story where GSP was the biggest draw in the UFC for several years. He was the welterweight champion. There hasn't been someone to replace him in his absence. So I think that's something that they're in dire need of.
So when you look at, there's a lot of great journeymen in the UFC, and we look at champions that they currently have, but then you think to yourself, okay, there's so much talk about McGregor and there's so much hype with McGregor. If McGregor loses, you think to yourself, recently Dana White, lost to Anderson Silva. Okay, Anderson Silva lost the title, but then there's also the whole steroid issue. Georges St. Pierre potentially might come back, but again, not on the roster right now. If his big mouthpiece, if you will, Conor McGregor loses, then if you're Dana White, are you freaking out, or do you just kind of look and say you've got a pretty deep roster?
I think you just roll with the punches. I think in this game, I think they probably realized that your champs or your big money draws can lose at any point in time. Right. So you really have to be hedging at all times, making sure that you're able to make a start of somebody new. So were they feeling it a bit when Ronda got knocked out? I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
I think that they've also done a great job of getting Holly Holm to kind of fill that vacuum and get out. And you probably saw Holly Holm do how many U.S. national media appearances in the week following her fight. So they're really good at picking up the pieces when things fall apart. And I think that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and I think this isn't a place they've not been before, right? You look at Chuck Liddell. I think when Chuck Liddell retired, a lot of people were going to Dana, who's going to be next? And then it was GSP. And then we have Ronda now, and now we have Conor. So I think, they always do a good job of building future stars. Sage Northcutt comes to mind now, and you have, freak athletes like that coming who are excellent in shape and are really good at all facets of the game. I really don't think they have anything to worry about. I think it's only going to continue to get bigger.
It just kind of goes to show that, as cold as it sounds, everybody can be replaced.
Everybody is replaceable.
Two people can't be replaced to you guys. And before I let you guys go, I want to ask you this question. You touched on it. John Jones, Daniel Cormier. I want to get your thoughts on that, because we're on a collision course, and I think as soon as we're done with Aldo McGregor, that's going to be the next big fight.
Yes.
I'll give you my opinion really quickly. I'd like to hear yours.
Okay.
When they fought the first time, I was all over the Daniel Cormier bandwagon. I thought he was a nice guy. He's decent. He tried to make amends with the whole a dust up that they had at the press conference, and he said, listen, that's not the type of person I am, but I don't want my kid to see me get punked. I understood that. I like Daniel Cormier up until the point where he won the title from Johnson, and he came out and then he said what he said about Jones after. And to me, at that point, he lost credibility. To me, class is a big thing. If you kind of go back and you look at Anderson Silva before he lost to Weidman, didn't shake hands, got knocked out. Ronda Rousey didn't shake hands, got knocked out. So you're noticing Jose Aldo in the press call earlier this week said, oh yeah, I'm going to shake his hand, because he's seeing the pattern. I don't like this mentality of you win the title and then you get an ego. So it kind of made me shift towards the whole John Jones thing. So there's a part of me that wants me to see John Jones come back and be extremely dominant against Cormier. So I want to get your thoughts on the whole Cormier-Jones too.
I think that John Jones is going to destroy Daniel Cormier in the second fight. I don't think he was anywhere near his best in the first fight, and I think we learned a lot about what he was doing before his fights after the last fight. And then we could probably all agree that he definitely wasn't living up to what his best is. I think the next version of John Jones we see is going to be even greater than what we've been accustomed to seeing. I think he's going to dominate Daniel Cormier in the second fight.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to jump on that and completely agree. I think if he had a chance at beating John Jones, it was when he was not working out in between camps, when he's smoking the green stuff every single night, as he said with Ariel Helwani on his interview the other day, and of course, getting into some other fun activities that we learned about through a drug test. I think if he couldn't beat him then, to see the pictures of him now, lifting those weights on his Instagram and how actual he's taking it completely serious. He's cut up. I don't think Daniel Cormier has a chance.
Yeah. And none of us here are condoning the behavior of John Jones, not even about that. But I'm also a big person when somebody's trying to turn their life around, kick them when they're down. So I think,
absolutely.
So I definitely think that that there's a comeuppance coming for that where Cormier is concerned. So
yeah, and I think John Jones, the movement, like there was so much hate for him before that Ariel Helwani interview that he did the other day. We actually talked about the night and what he specifically did and the thought process that went around it. And I think he, just by coming out and being honest and saying, you know what, I was living a persona before, and that wasn't me, and I was hiding who the real me was. I think a lot of people have now turned to his team and said, you know what, he was down, he's a good enough guy to say he was wrong, and now most people want to see him win, which is a big change from before.
Just before we came in here, I saw the notification, you guys might have seen it. Dana White is guaranteeing that CM Punk will fight in the year 2016. Is that still relevant at this point, or is that kind of like a sideshow?
I think it's a sideshow personally.
Okay.
Kind of having seen some of the clips of him training at Rufus Ford in Milwaukee, I was a little less than impressed with what I saw.
Okay.
And I think that, quite honestly, if he faces anyone respectable, I think he might really get hurt.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of hoping that they find someone at a lower level for him to fight if they do need to make a spectacle of it, which I think is what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's a money fight. Yeah.
But given his experience level or lack thereof, given his age, and then the level of athletes that you've got, even like the bottom level athletes in the UFC would still beat up 99.99% of MMA fighters outside of that organization. So I think he's got a lot to prove, and I'm genuinely scared for him.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that. I think if it was 10 years ago and he was 28, not 38, he might have a chance at this, but this is the big league. And even the smallest, most, people with the least experience are going to smash him and smash him.
I think he's got the same chance of succeeding in this as he would if he went to try out for the NFL. Quite frankly,
I think it's one of those things too, where from a conditioning standpoint, I think wrestlers, like professional wrestlers, have good conditioning, but in terms of it's just gonna go so much above and beyond just having good conditioning. And if you're a UFC fighter trying to make it, you do not want to be the person that's going to lose to CM Punk. So it'll be interesting. We covered a lot of awesome things. Thank you all so much for checking this out. Again, this is James, this is Mark, two extremely knowledgeable people in the world of MMA, and I thank them for taking the time to join me today. And thanks so much for checking this out. We'll talk to you soon.